try and start here. Okay, good.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome.
Yeah, move on down. Should we?
I call to order this special meeting of the Scottsdale Unified School District Governing Board. The date is Tuesday, May 29th, 2018, and the time is 8:05. We'll start with a roll call from my far right.
Sandy Kravitz.
Allison Beckham.
Kim Hartman. And I believe we have Board Member Kirby here.
Pam Kirby.
All right, and Barbara Perleberg. All board members are present, and we do have a quorum. If we can please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, we'll get started straight away on our first action item, 3A, approval of fiscal year 2019 staff salary increase and budget proposal. Dr. Creekard, Dr. Virgil? So
yes, thank you. Dr. Virgil does have a presentation ready to go over the various packages that we are recommending changes that were discussed at the last special board meeting. And he has answers to the questions that were asked as well. So he will present those and answer ensuing questions. Dr. Ridley.
Madam President, members of the board, Dr. Creekard, good morning. We're going to start, I'm going to start this morning kind of where we left off. And you had questions on, you wanted to see the positions on the classified salary study. And there's a couple of slides of those. You can see the positions that were moved, pay grades, and that in accordance with that study. And you had asked what those positions were. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of them there, and another 6 on this page. Okay. The next question that you had was on the personnel savings of what those savings, where they came from. Again, here are, and I think there's 3 pages of these, as far as what positions were either eliminated or added, so that the net was that 1.3 million. Actually, when we got into this and got into the weeds with it and each individual one and broke it down, it actually came up, instead of 1.3, it actually came out to about 1.6. So we picked up another 320,000 in savings as opposed to the estimate of 1.3. And so you can see the positions there that were eliminated. The Chief Operations Officer, that was a full position, but 3/4 of it had been paid out of bond, so it was only a 1/4 of 0.25 coming out of M&O. And then there's one more page on, and those were additions of what got added, and then the net was the 1.6.
Board Member Hartman.
Thank you, Dr. Virgil. Can you back up just one slide? I was just interested in, I think it was one more, the reduction of 2 APs and guidance counselor. Where are those hitting? Those just, I know, are kind of critical places, particular guidance counselor.
The assistant principals were at Pima and Pueblo, and those are moving to dean positions.
Okay. And can you remind me again the difference between those two?
I'm sorry, say again?
The assistant principal is an administrative position, and a dean is a teacher on assignment with stipend for some extra days. So there's a cost savings there.
Okay. And then can you speak to the counselor as well? I'm just really surprised because that seems to be a really, I mean, we have a very high ratio, I think, of 1 to 450 right now. So I'm surprised we're reducing.
Okay, if you would allow me, I'd like to ask Miss Amy Goff, the Assistant Director of HR, if she could come up and help answer a couple of those questions.
Good morning. The guidance counselor position, I would assume, was due to drop in enrollment, and a few schools most likely went to a partial guidance counselor rather than a 1.0. I unfortunately wasn't involved in the actual allocation of staffing. I more took over once I was putting people into positions, so I can't speak exactly to that.
Okay. So who is responsible for that decision-making, not so much from an AR perspective, but from a student service perspective? Because our ratios are really high in that area. I'm just really surprised that we're reducing that despite, even if there is reduction in enrollment, which, by the way, I think is more in the K-8 versus the 9-12, so.
Well, this is President Perleberg, board members. This is, again, part of the staffing allocation process that I talked about last week. And my understanding is that that was done by the Assistant Superintendent for Human Resources for all of the district in like February generally when staffing ratio is done. So they do an enrollment projection and then maintain, unless there's been a study for a change in class size or counselor load, or then they maintain the present one and just dole out the staff according to the number of students at the school. I believe that our counseling ratio is similar to neighboring districts, and not that that's right for anybody, and certainly bears looking into. But the time to do that usually is just prior to the staffing ratios being done, and we look at class sizes and do we have savings, or are there some areas of need, and special education becomes an issue because of students who come in and may have greater needs for staffing. You notice we had a special ed nurse reduction because that student that required that nurse is no longer with us. So all those kinds of staffing issues are done early in that spring. But it certainly makes sense that we do a study to look at counseling ratios and others at that time.
So to that point, I really would like a deeper analysis on that, just to add a little bit of context, because this probably precedes you, but the two classified positions that really this board were interested in if we're going to invest additional dollars was actually in security as well as guidance counselors. So apparently some decision was made behind the scenes that was not consistent with at least this board member, but I think multiple board members' direction. So, and it's a parent-driven, it's a student-driven, it's not an HR-driven answer. I think it potentially is a differentiator for our district. So, yeah, that would be great if we could look into that sooner than later.
Yeah, and it's more than that even. It's a whole security environment that
absolutely mental health plays
and we need
into
we need the 360-degree view of that. Right.
Well, I do have one clarifying question, because I've been looking at guidance counselor, 0.8395. How do we get to an FTE number like that? That's such
I have no clue.
odd number to me. How did we get there?
I agree. I think it's based on the funding code. I don't know, is there a whole position funded out of one source?
I don't know. It's either the funding code or the partial. I know we have we have a lot of partials because they only do so much in a day. So some of it's funding, some of it is actual what their hour assignment is.
So what would that, what's the remaining to make that whole? Would that be 1/6?
That is such an odd number.
1605 or something? 16 is around,
Right, .1605.
yeah, so 1/6 would be one less high school period. I mean, that's 5/6 of a high
That's
school.
5/6 of a high school counselor.
Yeah.
It's so odd how we got there. Board Member Beckham.
I'm going to follow up with the questions because those were my questions as well. What is the procedure? Let's say, because it was mentioned to me earlier that it's probably due to a drop in enrollment. What is the procedure if enrollment is greater? Now, we've taken into account we're not going to have this expense, but all of a sudden, we do need an additional counselor. Are we prohibited this year to get that additional counselor? Or what is the procedure to hire an additional?
For teaching positions, we've been watching enrollment and we've been in contact with principals, and we do have built-in contingency, which you'll see in a second, is how we add those in. For the guidance counselors, I'm unsure to that process, but if we do see a need for that, then we can build in an additional position.
It would come out of the same contingency that we have for all teachers' positions. But, yeah.
So I guess at this point, we could be assured, at least for this coming up year, we would not drop below the stated ratio that we have for counselors.
Correct.
And then, as we have mentioned in the past, I think that the direction that you talked about is to do a study so that we can look at actually decreasing that ratio, but increasing the number of counselors. Can you also explain to me the responsibility difference between an AP and a dean?
I think someone at the school site might be able to explain that a little better. I know my experiences in schools is sometimes there is an assistant principal and a dean, and the dean is more in training to be an assistant principal, so a lot of times they haven't had experience being an assistant principal before, and that's their building block to get there. Someone else may be able to speak on that a little more, but that's been my experience at schools.
That's what I was kind of thinking, which...
Dr. Nance might be able to help answer
Oh,
that.
I'm looking in the audience for
Good morning. There's very little difference in responsibility between those two positions. The assistant principal is on a little bit longer contract, has more days during the summertime in their contract, whereas the dean is basically working a teacher contract with some extra days added on at a per diem rate. So, but as far as the responsibilities, I don't know that I could give you any at this point.
So it sounds like it's more
It's
of a function
of the size of the school.
Oh, the size of the school, as well as then it decreases the budget because it's less days at that school.
And I guess you could
Working.
say that, 400 students is a lesser responsibility than 700 students. I mean, if you want to look at it that way. At one point, sometime back, HR brought to you some ratios that showed enrollment and who would qualify for an assistant principal position versus a dean position versus a half-time administrative position at the school. And so following those guidelines, a couple of the schools were below that. And when a vacancy opens up, and that's a dean position, that's what we fill it with.
Okay, so the reason for going from AP to dean, which wouldn't logically make sense given the scenario that was just mentioned about, the dean's the first position so that you can learn to be an AP, but now we're going backwards. It's really a function of the enrollment at that school.
Correct, and many APs come in as a brand new administrator to that position as well. It's not that we hire APs necessarily with administrative experience all the time. So either of those positions could be an entry-level position.
Okay, all right. And the coordinator of graphic design, was that just a position that was never filled?
It was vacant.
Vacant, okay, because we have a graphic designer, I know that. I didn't want people to think that we were getting rid of our communications area, because I know it's thin already too. And then is the nurse also a function of enrollment?
I believe that nurse was on an LOA last year, so that did not affect the budget.
Oh, it's LOA, leave
Leave
of
of
absence.
absence.
Can you go to the next slide for me? I think I had a question there. Most of these, okay, how do we get rid of a principal of an elementary school? Because we're not getting, or in a middle school, if we're not getting rid of a middle school or an elementary school.
One of those was having the dual principals at Tonalea to start the year last year. The other one, I believe, was an individual who was moved into a classroom position after the year started, but had already been on a principal contract and maintained that contract throughout the rest of the year.
Okay. All right, and the others are a function of enrollment, I take it. Does anybody else have a question on
No,
that? I'll go to the next
those are
slide.
my questions.
Board
Member Kirby, did you have any questions regarding these slides?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, thank you. If someone could elaborate on the permanent subs, as well as on the next slide, the unassigned teachers, the plus 11 for teachers and the down 3.4 on subs.
The permanent subs, my understanding is in the past, there was one permanent sub in each complex that was assigned every day to sub in that complex, and that there was no need for that any longer. The next slide, so you're talking the unassigned and the contingency?
Yes.
Okay, so 4 of those are still unassigned. So there were small cuts at each school, but those positions, I mean, those teachers still have a job. So we need to place them based on qualifications, and nothing has opened up. For an example, an art teacher who is certified only in art, and there's been no art vacancy yet. So there are 4 teachers still in that situation. The rest of the contingency is built for increased enrollment before the school year begins. So we've added 2 of those already based on needs in enrollment.
So 2 of the 4?
The 4 are the ones that are still unassigned that we're working to place. The rest of that 11.548 is contingency for if we need additional positions.
And so what happens if we don't need those additional positions? What happens to the 4?
Well, okay, so the 4 are teachers that need placement. So those 4 are definitely taken care of. The contingency is in there for the whole year, and if anything at all, guidance counselors, teachers, needs to be added throughout the year, then we use those. So those are built in every year to the budget, but this year it looks like with the combine of the unassigned, it was a little bit more.
Actually,
Dr. Kriegart?
thank you. If the question is what will happen to the 4 unassigned teachers if spots are never found for them, they have a contract, they would serve as permanent subs in that case.
What about the 7.5?
And the remainder 7.5 goes back to the budget carryover, because that's not actual people.
Okay.
The 7.5 is
It's contingency.
it's money.
Okay,
Yes.
that's what I think. Okay.
Okay, and then thank you for that. And back to the permanent subs, why was it determined that there was no longer a need?
That honestly was not a decision made by me. I wasn't involved in that, so I'm unsure how that was made, but I guess it just wasn't working out, and we have subs that we place in those positions. I don't know why.
And I think we can revisit that as we go along. We've had some conversation regarding the role of a permanent sub at a level that's a little higher than the sub rate, whatever that turns out to be, and I think there's good reason to have people on call on a regular basis like that, people that are well trusted at the schools and well known, and can also on days that they wouldn't be needed provide other kinds of support. But that's I think that's an issue that we will revisit, especially looking at those
Okay.
4 teachers. Yeah.
Thank you. And so, last question. Much of this is based on an enrollment level, assumed enrollment level. What is that enrollment level?
I'm unsure. The enrollment and the allocations happened at the cabinet level, and I was not involved in that.
I will get that for the board.
Okay. Any additional questions, or we'll move forward, Dr. Virgil?
Thank you. Okay, the other detail I wanted to bring you was the bus driver incentive stipends. You can see this is in addition to the changing their position pay grade, but an incentive stipend, quite frankly, to stem our loss of bus drivers so that we can keep them, give them an incentive to stay with us.
Board Member Beckham?
Are other districts doing these incentives also, or is this?
Yes, they are.
They are.
Yes.
So it just brings us up to being competitive with the marketplace.
It makes us more competitive to keep our drivers.
I have a question.
Board Member Kirby?
Dr. Virgil, we've been told in the past that individuals will come to Scottsdale Unified to get their CDL training, and then once they get their license and we pay for that training, and then once they get that, they leave. My first question is that still true today? Are we still seeing that same trend? And then as a follow-up, if the answer is yes, are these stipends commensurate with the typical timing of when we see them get their CDL and leave? So, for example, if they come to Scottsdale and leave within the first 2 years, is a $100 stipend really going to do much to stem that tide?
I do not know the training cycle on the CDLs. I do not know how many of Train Our Own that we have. The incentive stipend is recommended because to make us competitive with other districts. We lost, I believe, five or six drivers to another district who went there for a signing bonus that we lost. That district has signing bonuses in addition to incentive stipends for people to stay. Many districts have incentive stipends to keep their drivers. And I do not know how that relates to the number of CDL trainings that we have conducted versus how many of those that we have lost.
Dr. Krieger?
Thank you, President Perlberg, board members. I was looking over Dr. Virgil's shoulder at Mr. Jeff Cook, the Director of Transportation, and he was shaking his head no, that we no longer have that issue of people paying for their CDL and then leaving. Is that correct, Mr. Cook?
That is correct.
Correct me if I'm wrong, if memory serves, we went to the practice of, I think if they leave within a year or two, they have to reimburse us for the cost of that CDL. Is that correct?
Nodding his head, yes.
Okay, yes.
Okay.
That's what I remember us changing that
Okay.
a few years back. Okay,
Okay.
great.
You need eyes behind your head, Dr. Virgil.
I need my own camera.
Okay, so one last question. Then are these stipends, do these stipends line up with where our turnover is happening?
Yes.
Because there's a cost to training. And the follow-on question to President Perlberg is, are we actually getting reimbursed from folks who leave? That would be, but is this a longevity stipend, or is this a stipend to try to stem the turnover where it's happening?
I look at it as both. I like to call it a loyalty bonus rather than an incentive. But to answer your earlier question, okay, as far as losing them, because of the CDL, that's really not happening anymore. And 5 of the 6 drivers that we lost to Madison School District all had 10 or more years of service. They received a $500 signing bonus to go over there, but they also got paid about $3 more an hour. So it's all tied together. So will this totally eliminate it? No, but it will help.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Jeff.
No additional questions?
Okay.
We can carry on.
Okay, and that brings us to the recommendation. The recommendation is a 7.5% certified salary increase, and that's based on the 18 salary schedule because we already increased the schedule 0.5%. So total then would be an 8%. We'd bring the entire schedule up from 18, 8%. So this isn't 7.5% on top of a 0.5%. This is so that we have a net total of an 8% increase to the salary schedule to the 18 salary schedule. And then also we had the previously approved 2% increase so that teachers will see a 10% increase compared to their 18 contract. Stipends for individuals at the end of the column, except columns A, B, and C. And the stipend amounts, we'll do those individually so that those individual salaries reflect the same 10% increase over their 18 contract that all the other teachers will see by virtue of getting the step. The 4% classified salary increase and a 1% administrator increase. And like to note on, before I go to the next slide, the note there at the bottom, this recommendation will bring our starting teacher salary to $41,320.
Board Member Beckham?
And just to remind me, our starting salary this year was 37,000 something? Or was it 39?
I believe it was 38.
38?
38,260.
260, 38,260. Okay.
The classified salary study change that we just looked at those position grade changes for the 580, the bus driver incentive, the bus driver salary increase, which is a position grade change, 4 additional security personnel, and increase the substitute pay by $5 per day. HR conducted a benchmark around our surrounding districts, and I'm using the base rate for subs, and the longer you sub, the more dollars per day that you get, but the base, our base now is $87.50. Benchmarking other districts around us, it's between 90 and 95. And so $5 would put us at $92.50, which would put us in the pack. That represents 5.7% increase on that base amount. To give you some background info on the subs, we used 14,300 sub days. We had, and that number's rounded, we did not fill 2,300 requests that were unfilled. So if you add those together, the total request for subs was at 16,600. So about a little less than 14% of those were not filled by subs coming in. HR, yeah, we didn't fill some, but they don't feel that we're in a critical shortage of subs at our current for this year. So it going up $5 a day will help get us again in the ballpark in the range of where the other districts are at on their sub pay. So the total cost of this recommendation is $7,533,000. Go back, this is going back over these numbers that you've seen before, the funds that are available, what was already obligated. Now that number dropped a little bit because when we did when we got down into the nitty-gritty detail on the Personnel changes, that estimate went from 1.3 to 1.6, so that already obligated drops a little bit. So the recommendation amount at 7.5 million gives us a deficit of 3.78 million. And as before mentioned, we had 5 million of unallocated funds in the M&O, and so that would drop that 5 million to about 1.2 million of unallocated M&O funds.
Board Member Beckham?
Thank you for joining us. Can you go back to that first slide you just showed us? Because I had a question on that first slide.
The first slide?
Well, not the first slide of this little subsection that you did. So it says stipends for the individuals at the end of the column. There were two numbers given to us at the last meeting, and so I'm trying to correlate those numbers to the 28,000, which don't seem to fit. At one point, there was like half a dozen individuals, and then the number came up that there were 90 individuals at the end. If there were 90 individuals, I would have thought that that 98,000 would have been a lot more. So how many individuals were we looking at when we came up with that $28,000 number?
That $28,000 is a handful, and those that are on the end of the column. The exception is columns A, B, and C, and those are the columns that don't go down as far. They don't have as many steps as the other columns, and they were shorter in number of steps by design so as to provide incentive for staff to move over and continue their professional development and their knowledge base. And so to maintain that incentive, the individuals that are at the bottom of those columns would not get a step move to maintain that incentive to increase their education level. So and those three, A, B, and C at the bottom, was where the approximate of 90 comes from.
So now that makes sense. So the people that are at the 80 or so people that are at the A, B, and C level, do they get any increase?
They'll get an 8% increase by the salary schedule increase, yes.
All right.
And can achieve that other 2% if they take classes or education.
Can you then go to the next slide, please? Since we saw this last week, it was mentioned too on the security personnel that's, I understand that's 4 times the 25,000, but at 25,000, we're not able to get applicants. So I was kind of thinking maybe that number would have increased somewhat. So was there a conversation about we're having difficulty getting security applicants at the amount that we're compensating the security for, because they can go to other markets and make a lot more than coming to the school district. So was that talked about and then decided just not to have anything added to it? Or was it talked about and said, you know what, we think we will be able to get applicants at that dollar amount?
For the security personnel, the original request was to increase that salary by 1 or 2%. And the thought process by not having that in the recommendation is that we're increasing the classified salary schedule 4%. And so the 4% increase gives them a 4% increase, which is 2 more than the 2% requested.
Oh, so that they are, so, okay. But bringing in 4 new ones, will we be able to actually have applicants at $25,000? Is the 25,000 kind of, that's got that built-in number in it also? Or I thought we were having trouble finding applicants at the rate, which was that 25,000, or are my numbers wrong?
No, your numbers are not wrong as to whether that will bring them in or not. It should. What actually happens, I don't know,
So
but it should.
We need to increase that.
The expectation is that it will, that the 4% increase on the salary schedule on the what we're paying security personnel, that will help bring them in. I don't know that it is a solution in and of itself.
Well, I just want to be aware and have the history known. Last year, we weren't hiring additional security because we weren't getting the applicants and we weren't willing to raise it up. So I just want to have some, I guess, assurance that if we're not getting applicants, that we're not going to go a whole nother year without additional security because we made that number too low, that we've got some cushion in there to move it up. It would make sense to me.
Yeah, that's.
Otherwise, we'll be 2 years without security.
Right. That's fair, and I think James Dorr will be able to let me know if we get closer to school opening that we still don't have any applicants and so forth, and so we may come back. And if we increase it as a result of that, that would be an information item for you. I don't, we still have contingency, so it wouldn't require your vote, but we would let you know that we are doing that in order to try to fill those positions. So we're in constant touch. So.
All right, great. Now my big item, my substitute teacher pay. I was surprised when I found out that the substitute teachers had, in 2011, were asked to take a pay cut, kind of a substantial pay cut, for budgetary purposes, and everybody said great, because everybody understood in 2011 that that was necessary, but it's been since 2011 since the substitute teacher pay has actually even been visited. And so I understand a 5% pay increase would bring them kind of the middle of the pack or lower middle of the pack. But I really would like to see it go up to maybe the 2011 pay rate, which I think is about, is it $11? And if not that, to at least $10 per day, so that, I mean, it's $90,000 for $5 per day. Is it logical to assume if we increase that to $10 per day, that would go up to $180? Or is there, because of the ladder that's involved, it would be more than $180,000?
No, because if we were to increase it from 5 to 10, all the spots on the ladder go up, that additional 5, and that's what this is based on. So it would be it'd be a safe assumption to say that going from 5 to 10 would double this from 90 to 180.
I just don't think $180,000, given the entire budget and the total cost of recommendation, to bring our substitutes back up to what they were making in 2011, or right about there if it was 10, is asking too much. I mean, I think that we've got some very long-term substitute teachers, and I think that's a true benefit to our students. And they're looking at, you know what, to have a full day's worth of work and it's 8 hours, they're making $11 an hour, $10 an hour is all that they are really making. And what they're saying is it's not making much sense for us to come into work. They don't get benefits, if I'm correct. Is that correct? They don't get benefits? No. They have to pay for their own gas. I don't know. It just seems to me it's not asking too much.
Member Kravitz.
Could you just clarify, but if someone is a long-term sub, I'm not quite sure, does that kick in after 30 days? Do they get paid more?
You have the.
And then with the change in law last year with regard to, I don't know, minimum wage, I don't know if that affects subs in terms of what kind of benefits they get.
The sub pay is tiered.
Oh, okay.
It's tiered, and I don't have the tiers in front of me, but after so many days, after subbing so many days, the dollar amount per day increases, and I think there's 4 levels. So then more days, you go up to the next level, and then after you hit a certain threshold, you go up to another level.
But I think every level was cut in 2011, and every level has stayed for the last 7 years at that level. They've had no cost of increase for anything. So really, it's, to me, I know you mentioned it was a 5-point-something% increase, but that's over 8 years that it's a 5% increase, not over just 1 year. So I just really would like to put it out to the board to consider raising that. It's a, you know, you did it to 10, it's going to be $180,000 to the budget. I mean, an additional maybe on top.
Could I ask a question?
We'll have Board Member Hartman make have her question, and then you'll be next.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. And thank you to Board Member Beckham for bringing this to our attention, because I don't think it has actually been a topic in the past several years that I'm aware of. Couple questions. So I'm kind of interested in that 2,300 days that we noted that they were substitute days, unfilled substitute days. So what exactly does that mean? Does that mean a classroom without a substitute? And it means sharing teachers across? Okay, that 15% is 2,300 days, 15%, I think is a pretty alarming number for a school district. I know it's statewide, but to that point, I think that's validating that there's issues. Can you give me a little background? Because I've got a suggestion, but I want to understand some things first. When we look at our substitute base, how many are kind of recurring, we go back to, there's probably a term we use for it, versus, you know, we see them once or twice in a school year. What's that look like?
I do not have the numbers on that. Ms. Goff?
Morning again. Our substitute coordinator has worked on this study, and before this came to the attention of the board, I know she had looked into it because she was very alarmed as well about the unfilled substitutes each day. So to that, she initiated this looking into their sub pay and trying to get them more. As to the unfilled, that's when teachers have to cover. So that's obviously unfortunate to have them pulled away from their preps to cover for substitutes. The question as to, was it?
Of our substitute base, how many are recurring, you know, have longevity, come multiple days, significant number of multiple days versus others that maybe just come once or twice a year?
We can definitely look into that for exact numbers, and our ASOP system can pull things like that. I don't know that off the top of my head, but I do know there are quite a few substitutes that only come a few days or maybe didn't come at all. And there's some that substitute every single day. But for exact numbers, we can definitely pull those for you guys.
Can you share, just anecdotally, getting the numbers would be great, but anecdotally, of our, it's a base of how many substitute teachers do we have? 600?
I don't know off the top of my head.
I was giving you a number about 400.
400, okay. Do you just roughly, how many are kind of returning substitutes? Come, you know, schools know them, they come, they cover a particular grade or a particular school. Just, I mean, is it over half? Is it?
I honestly don't know.
Okay.
But we can find that out.
Okay. I guess what I was trying to get to is, if we have two issues. One, we need to be able to attract a skill set that is very competitive. So clearly it's about, I mean, a significant piece of it is going to be about dollars, because they can go to another neighboring district very easily. Secondly, if they're recurring in nature, I mean, we're extending our SUSD family, if you will, by attracting and retaining talented substitute teachers. So I would think it would be interesting to understand, are they coming back, you know, and we want to attract that. It seems to me if we still have a 15% issue, and I guess this partial 5.7%, do we think that's going to address it? Or do we, to be middle of the pack? Or would it behoove us to bump it up to top of the pack, which would be another $3, which is another $45,000 roughly, based on, well, I'm not sure if I can do the math, but that may not be right, but it's somewhere in that neighborhood, I think.
Okay,
May
Dr.
I'll
Picard?
answer
Sure.
before we get to
Dr.
another
Picard?
question. The issue of the 2,300 days is not just a substitute issue, but it also becomes a school teacher issue. Our practice is to pay teachers $20 to use their planning period to go in. But that's very disruptive to them and not always a popular thing to do for a principal to go ask someone to do that. So yes, to attract is very important and to compete with others. I don't have an issue. Dr. Virgil and I have talked. We don't have an issue with increasing the sub pay more than the $5 for all the reasons that have been stated.
Okay, so when I don't know if I'm doing the math exactly right, but we said we went from $87.50 to $92.50. 95 would be the top, which is a difference of another $3, times the 16,000 days is somewhere in the neighborhood of $48,000 to do that. Does that, Dr. Virgil, what are your thoughts on that? You've seen this from multiple districts.
You've got 1.2 million unallocated, so another 45,000. It's only money. I mean, I don't want to downplay it, but it's. I don't know that another $45,000 is going to move the needle one way or the other.
On the budget.
On the budget, right?
It may help.
Right. I'm sure it would probably help the sub situation, but I don't. It's not going to. It's not going to be the issue of the budget.
Yeah. Just one quick follow-up point.
And then
Yeah, I don't know. This is one of those items that not only does it attract, I'm hearing it will attract substitutes, it does impact the workday for our existing staff, which at the bottom line means it impacts the quality of education our students are getting. So this seems to be a high priority item, particularly if we think it'll attract and retain the best talent. Okay.
Board Member Kirby?
Thank you. So my comment, please don't take my comments as that I'm opposed to increasing the substitute pay if that's the right solution. And I'm not confident that we don't have that we have a good understanding of the problem. If you remember, we as a board eliminated blackout days for our teachers. I'm not entirely sure when that was effective. And my first question would be, and I guess what I'm trying to say is we need a bit more of a holistic view of this rather than just throw money at it. At the end of the day, we may come back and say, yes, we need to throw money at it. But did we see an increase at all in our available days, substitute days, because we eliminated the blackout days? And if we did, then we need to ask ourselves, do we want to revisit that decision, or do we want to just accept that this is the new normal of days that we have to fill? And then along with that, with respect to the blackout days, what percent of our teachers took what percent of the days? So part of the rationale when we implemented the blackout days, and I never saw this data, that decision was made prior to me coming onto the board, but 20% of the teachers took 80% of the days, of the substitute days, available days. Is that the root issue that we need to address? And so I guess overall, what is our strategy here with addressing the number of available days? 16,600 days. I don't have my calculator with me, and my phone's my calculator, so I can't do this math and talk to you too. But how many full-time equivalents does that translate into? And what do we want for our substitutes? Do we want experienced substitutes with classroom experience, which I'm assuming was that full-time sub? That's just an assumption. I don't know. Or are we looking truly for people who want to come in and make, divide $90 a day by 8 hours? That's kind of barely minimum wage. So what's our overall strategy? So I feel like I missed one. This was, again, thank you, Board Member Beckham, for bringing it to our attention. But I don't really feel like we've analyzed it thoroughly. And yes, it's only $180,000. It may or may not solve the issue, I guess is what I'm saying. And I just hate to throw money at something without having a good understanding of the problem.
Thank you, Board Member Beckham.
Thank you for bringing that up, Board Member Kirby, because I didn't really articulate, I think, the two things. We have two issues. At least that's how I'm seeing it. One is, and I have some of the same questions I think that you are asking that need to be answered a little further down the road because we don't have the time to answer them before we actually approve this portion of the budget. And because of that, I'm really looking at this $180,000 as not solving a problem maybe that we don't understand regarding the type of substitute, what substitute we need, do we have too many substitute days, and does that then translate into a teacher issue? That I'm kind of keeping separate. What I'm looking at really is making substitute teachers whole again from a cut that they were given in 2011 and then never addressed in the past 8 years. One other item that has to be mentioned, besides having the day rate cut, they were also cut the $20 if they stepped up and did a planning period in addition to their day rate. And so there's more that they lost than just the day rate. And I haven't even addressed that here because I kind of was thinking, okay, let's look at the day rate first. And this year when we go back and we look at maybe do an analysis of those questions that were just brought up, we can also look at that $20 because right now, as I understand it, that's being paid to the teachers as well if they cover that period. So I'm just looking at it truly from a cost standpoint and bringing them back into what I believe is fair, and that is raising it, you know, the $180,000. So I'm not looking at it as money being thrown. I'm looking at it as really just reinstating what is a fair rate at this moment for SUSD as well as the marketplace.
Board Member Hartman.
I'd like to make a proposal because I think this discussion is a really good discussion, and that is I do see it as two different. You know, there's two different components to this. There's one just to make us baseline competitive, and then there's the other side, which is what's the analysis behind it, a little more strategic view of how to attract and retain the best. So my proposal would be, as opposed to the 180, if we just increased it another $3, we'll be at 92. We'll be at 95.50, which will be competitive, top of the local neighboring districts, and that will only be around $48,000. So what if we can agree to $48,000 now, just so that we can be competitive?
On top of the 90,000.
On top of the 90,000, yeah, that'll just get us to
95.
At least that's where we're at in the marketplace, and then a little deeper analysis to understand what do we need to do to be more strategic. So that would be my proposal. And then in answer to Board Member Kirby's question, I did do the math, and that's equivalent to about 75 full-time FTEs, which is equivalent to about 5% of 1,500 teacher base. So, you know, it's a sizable amount of work commitment that we're looking at. So I think it really does underscore getting competitive first and a deeper analysis. So that would be my proposal to fellow board members.
Okay, Dr. Precard?
Thank you. President Perleberg, board members, I agree that the $8 would be money well spent, I think. And regarding the $20 for the extra class, that's not even a budget issue because we're paying it one way or the other. And I don't see, to help the school level, I don't see the problem in offering that to the substitutes rather than a teacher. I mean, because we're paying for it either way. And if we can relieve one other minor source of irritation for the teachers, as well as benefit the substitutes, we could do that.
Board Member Beckham?
I appreciate you bringing that up, because at the $8, I couldn't approve that, because I just feel it's fair to come up to the 10, which is still, I think, a little bit less than the 2011.
But we can still do that after the analysis next year.
Okay. So, but I appreciate that additional 20, because I think that really helps coming in. And so as long as there is an intent to really look at making them whole in the following year, that is something that I could support.
Dr. Creekard? Could I mention, just for clarification, that the dollars that go to teachers for covering classes only happens at the secondary schools? That does not happen in the elementary schools at all. So there is no compensation for elementary teachers who cover classes.
Oh, okay.
So there would be an
Another
additional
reason to pay the
cost then for
subs.
elementary if we added that to fifth, sixth.
We hear that quite often.
Sure, that could
The one
increase the possibilities.
The one comment I have is more of a hesitation to look at it from an angle of, well, they were here in this year and we make them whole. There's a lot of conversations in our district about, our staff being made whole and going back to certain days. I don't know how productive that really is. I'm much more comfortable looking at the market where it is now, making sure that we are competitive, and I completely agree that we need to take a hard look at our strategies, one as a district, to at least minimize our substitute costs as much as possible, and also make sure that we have quality substitutes when we need them. So, but I'm just hesitant to use kind of come at it of, well, this is where it was and we need to make this staff whole, because I mean, we know we have a lot of teachers that look at the time of the recession and we're not able to make them whole in that sense, because we don't have those dollars being infused back in to go back to level. It's just, I don't think it's tremendously productive to come at it from that angle. So that's where I'm only comfortable today to discuss, what might put us towards the top of that market rate today.
I have a question or comment.
Kirby?
Thank you for that. I agree, and I appreciate Board Member Hartman's go-forward strategy. Dr. Creekard, do we have to wait a whole year until next budget cycle to do the analysis? And if we decided that investing more in subpay was the right thing to do we have to wait a whole year, or can we do that mid-year?
Sure. Right now, we just have to wait till we hire an assistant superintendent for HR, which I hope we are able to bring you somebody for June 26th meeting, as we have no meetings in July, and we would want that person to start as soon as possible. So that being an HR function that I would want an assistant superintendent leading the analysis, especially, well, I don't know, could be somebody internally that knows some things, or it could be somebody outside that brings in a fresh perspective. But at any rate, yes, we have contingency in the budget still. We still have a little bit of unallocated funds, and this would not be, if it was an increase of you vote for the $8 now, it's an increase of another $2 that makes a difference, or policy when it comes to blackout days or whatever, that can be instituted at any time once that analysis is completed.
Okay, thank you. And I don't want anyone listening to think that we're going to reverse the decision on blackout days. I still stand by that decision, pending any analysis that shows me it was a bad one. And we have to focused on here is having substitutes in classrooms on a recurring basis is not good for the academic achievement of our individual students. It's a frustration for families, a frustration for parents. They aren't as productive of a day as it would have been with a full-time classroom teacher. And that's what we need to focus on minimizing, is the number of days, and then knowing that we will have some, how do we get the highest quality substitute to fill that need?
Yep.
Board Member Beckham.
I agree, and thank you, President Perlberg, if my words that I used to make whole is not the correct one. And I agree completely on, I mean, to me, that's just another component that I don't think that has been looked at, but the effectiveness of our substitutes, and how do we make sure, what is our hiring process? But that goes into that second component of analysis. And I appreciate, I want to say too, because I did not realize that mid-budget we could maybe make some changes that way. And so thank you for bringing that up, Board Member Kirby.
Okay. Board Member Hartman.
Okay. One last comment. I'm assuming we're moving forward with, we'll make an amendment with the $3 to move this up to the $92.50.
Is that math correct? Are we
Based on what you
totally,
gave us.
I just want to make sure.
$3 would bring it up to $95.50, an additional 3, because that would be a total of 8, and you're at $87.50 now, so 8 would be $95.50.
And the market range that you described,
Was 90 to 95.
90 to 95.
Yeah. And there was 16,600 days, so times that additional $5 is what gets me to roughly that.
Plus the $20.
$3.
For the planning period, we need to add in.
Well, the 20 we're already paying anyway.
High school, maybe.
Okay, that
Well, but
20
for elementary, we would need to add in whatever that might be.
wouldn't be that big.
Yeah, someone would have to figure out how to actually do that.
Right, and just put in a number that we, I just don't want it to be forgotten in the proposal.
Well,
You're not proposing that?
what I'm saying is, until we know more, I think what we're hearing, it's neutral in the high school.
Right.
So that we can do right away, because that'll be just shifting dollars and it's optional. But I think we need a larger analysis to understand
Right.
the bigger picture, of which primary, or K-8's another piece of it.
I just think in the amount of money that we're talking about, and.
We don't know that amount, that's the
Well,
thing.
let's just say even if it's, well, okay, I'll give it that, but it's not gonna be in the millions of dollars or the
Yeah.
half of millions of
Even
dollars,
if
so we're looking
even
at
if
tens of
even if it's
thousands.
$5,000 or
So,
$10,000.
right, so I'm just, I'm for actually increasing it more than 8 to 10. So I'll go back to that, although I have a feeling that that's not getting the
Yeah.
traction that I would like, but that's okay.
I mean, I'm just doing the back of the envelope
understand.
math. And this is what I'm thinking we're talking about. If it's 16,600 days, and just say 2/3 are elementary, right? K-8, but just say, so that would be roughly 12,000 times $20, right? That's what we're saying, $20.
Well,
It's hard to
it's
know, because
per
you don't know
day.
how
You
many
don't
there
know.
are.
Yeah,
you
I would
just
just,
don't.
it's a
You
big
need to do
question,
the
right?
analysis.
It's just not a lot
And the
of
hope
money.
is, by increasing our sub pay, that we will attract more subs and we'll have fewer uncovered days.
Right.
And so, but that, again, is a hope. It's hard to budget on a hope, I know.
Yeah.
But
But we do,
that's the intent.
yeah.
Board Member Hartman?
Okay. I think we are getting closer to agreement, so I'm glad with that. I also just wanted to acknowledge that I appreciated this board and the staff's, administration's patience in delaying the vote from last Thursday to today, because I think it did exactly what we wanted it to do, was to provide input and another quality check by key stakeholders. And my takeaway, based on these 4 days, I mean, I think we received absolutely zero input from our certified staff, which only means affirmation, because we hear in the opposite direction. So I feel very good about what that tells us about our decisions on the 10%. With respect to the classified, last Thursday, I actually did ask if we should look at 4% versus 2%, because it was, every percent was 248,000. And that seemed like a worthwhile investment for classified staff, because they're an essential part of an educational experience for students. And you sharpen the pencil, and we figure out how to do that. And then it also provided us and we actually got feedback from the classified staff on this point. And my understanding is they're very satisfied with this proposal, so that seems like a win-win. And then it also allowed us to have the substitute teacher conversation, I thought was very healthy discussion. So thanks for the extra time, the extra work. I feel really good about the direction we're going with the one adjustment we talked about today. So thank you. Board Member Kirby, did you have a question or comment?
No, just Hartman hit it right on. She's spot on. I think the process worked well, and I appreciate over the weekend and last week the extra work to put to get us to where we are.
I agree. We got to a very good place. One question I had for clarity, we had talked about last week longevity stipends for some of our certified staff that are at the top.
That's the 10%.
And that's what I was trying to, I just wanted to clarify that they will see
That's
an
the
increase.
second bullet, the stipends for the individuals that are at the end of the column, except for columns A,
Except
B,
for
and C.
okay.
Right. That those individuals, and there was only a half dozen or so of those, that we would give them a stipend, and I didn't put a specific amount because they're in different areas, but we would, because there's only a half a dozen, it's easy enough to figure one for each one of them individually so that their total increase matches the 10% increase that all the other teachers are going to get.
So that's where that is, and those individuals receive an equivalent of a 10% stipend.
Well,
Is that,
no,
or-
the stipend wouldn't be 10% because the salary schedule is going up 8%. So the stipend would be approximately 2%.
The 2%. Okay, that makes sense
So that
now.
brings them to the same
I get that
10%
picture
that
now.
teachers that
Okay.
are getting the step are going to get.
Okay, great. So they're just not out of luck because they're at the top of that scale. That's great. I just
Right.
want that clarity. Okay, thank you. Board Member Kravitz.
I just had a quick question for Ms. Goff. Since you're sitting here, it'll save me an email. How or what do we do to capture our retiring teachers to serve as substitute teachers? Because it was mentioned something about quality substitutes, and I would think that some of our retiring teachers are probably our best qualified substitutes. So I'm thinking of one elementary school teacher that I know of that's retiring this year who has been in our district forever, and I would think she'd make a great sub, but she may be like, I'm out of here, but I'm sure there are some that are like, yes, I'd come back and sub.
I know that a lot of them do come back and sub. This is my first year in the district, but I think that reaching out to the retirees is a fantastic idea, so we can definitely do that.
So you're not aware
I'm
of
not
how
sure
we
what they've done
currently
in
do
the-
that before they turn back their keys?
What?
Before, so you don't know how we do that before they turn in their keys?
I mean, we can reach out to
Okay.
them. We have a list of who's retiring,
Okay.
so we can call them, send them
Okay.
emails, but that's a good idea.
Okay. Any additional questions or comments, or do we have further to go on the slide show? I think we're there, right? Right.
That is, that's the last slide for M&O. We've still got a couple on capital that we need to address, but that's the last slide on M&O.
Okay.
So this is the last one of the salary package, which is the
action.
agenda
Yeah,
item.
which is
the action.
That they can
Oh,
vote,
okay.
that they
It's
can
our
vote
action
on.
item.
Yes.
Okay. All right, Board Member Hartman, did you have a comment? I'll make a motion. But you said there's another capital, but it's not related
it's
to
not
the,
salary.
to the salary. Okay. I just want, I guess, a little more clarity on the substitute stipend. Or, no, I'm sorry, not stipend, the substitute increase. Do we need a very specific dollar amount to approve today? Are we looking at, to say, increase substitute pay by $8 per day? Is that what we're saying here today and comfortable with?
Yes, I believe the
Working within that
recommendation
budget.
for the subs would be a specific dollar amount to increase the substitute pay by the $8 a day. If that's your agreement to do, then the recommendation would be to increase the substitute pay by $8 per day, and that would be for every level, for every tier, would go up $8 per day.
Oh. Okay. And that, in the budget, would not be over, just trying to do the math, but wouldn't be over an additional 45,000.
48,000 approximately,
okay.
right?
All right. Okay. Board Member Hartman, did you have a, do we have any additional questions? Board Member Kirby, any additional questions or comments?
No, I'm good, thank you.
Okay. All right. I guess if we're ready to make a motion.
All right. I'll make a motion to approve the 2019 staff salary increase in budget proposal as discussed with the modification of substitute per day rate of an additional $8 in total. So that will be actually $92.50. Okay.
95.
I'm sorry, $95.50.
$95.50 for that base rate of the sub, right?
Thank you, Board Member Hartman. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Board Member Kravitz. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Motion passes 5-0. Thank you. And thank you for bringing these recommendations. It feels terrific to approve these increases for our staff. It's absolutely wonderful that we're able to do this. So thank you. All right. So we're ready to move on to our next item, correct? Or did you have something additional?
Yes.
Before we move on to,
Answer to
for
another
3B.
question that was budget related, but not.
Well, it's
salary.
budget related, but not salary specific.
okay.
And that
All right,
was
let's
the
move
issue
to
on, you had asked for information on vehicles, specific vehicles to be replaced. And for people transportation, I've got the specific vehicles to be replaced. On the pupil transportation side, and you can see the year models that we would be replacing, and that would reduce the average age on pupil transportation from 11.35 to 10.85. And then on the campus support fleet, the recommendation for the vehicles to replace, and that reduces the average age on the campus support fleet from 13.2 to 10.2 on the average age. So that then the district additional assistant recommendation, the copiers and the building services remain the same. The addition of the vehicles, and I have rounded at $500,000 each on people transportation and campus support. Those dollar amounts per individual vehicle are estimates, and of course we would go out and get bids on those and get an exact figure. But we can limit it to the $500,000 for each one, and then that leaves you $1.6 million unallocated on the capital side, on the DAA side.
Can I ask a question?
Let me ask a question first. Ms. Martin, I mean, I appreciate this kind of follow-up information, but I feel we truly don't have an agenda item here that we're discussing this under.
Oh.
So I am a little concerned about actually having a discussion. I appreciate the follow-up, but
You're right.
Ms. Marshall, can you help me
President
here?
Perleberg,
It doesn't
we should-
fall under budget.
we should-
Yeah,
Increase the
I,
budget.
I feel like, yeah.
It doesn't fall under budget.
It says budget, it says staff salary increase and
Budget proposal, does that cover us?
If you're unsure, then we can send this out as part of a weekly packet, because it's information item.
You can,
Budget proposal might.
yeah, it's okay under budget proposal.
Are we good? Okay, all right. Okay, yes, Board Member Kirby. We got the go-ahead. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So remind me, on the 6 white activity buses, remind me how many we currently have and how many we're phasing out and not replacing.
Okay, if I could ask Mr. Cook, Jeff?
We currently, I believe, have 28 of the AB white buses. And as far as the number phasing out, I haven't decided to phase out any at this point. These ones, I believe this slide was actually wrong. I think it was 2001 or 2002 year models that we were getting rid of.
Okay.
I may have
This was-
given
right.
you, wrong
Yeah.
information. But so the initial ones were to replace these old ones, and then we would look at the utilization of those and whether, as we further go on with those other 28, whether we would start decreasing the size of the AB buses as well, like we have with the yellow buses.
Okay, I'd like to propose to flip that we evaluate the utilization before we start buying new ones. Because, and this is anecdotal, but it's my understanding that many of these activity buses haven't run, physically been able to start up and move for years, which tells me we haven't been using them, which then begs the question, why do we need to buy more? So I'm sorry to be a stickler on the transportation, but I just feel like in this area for years we've just thrown good money after bad.
Okay.
And I've yet to see a replacement strategy or policy of how do we evaluate when and how many buses, yellow buses, white buses, and it would even apply to these support buses, support fleets. How do we evaluate when we replace them? Is it solely, this analysis would lead you to believe it's solely based on the year of the model. But other factors come into play. For example, maintenance costs, mileage. I think there's an opportunity here in transportation, and there has been for years. So, Mr. Cook, this isn't a reflection on your work. You've brought us tremendously forward with respect to route analysis, but on the asset side, there is no holistic strategy to manage our assets in the transportation area that I have seen.
Okay. I agree with many of the things you said. We absolutely need to look at utilization as well as the maintenance costs and all the other things that you referenced. I do disagree with you that these buses have not run for years. That is not true. They are used. They just don't get a lot of miles on them. We are starting to, by necessity, have to use those AB white buses more frequently because of the lack of bus drivers to cover things. So a lot of the smaller high school sports trips are going to be going in these AB buses. And again, these, I believe, the ones are either 2001 or 2002 model years that we're looking to replace here first. And do they have a lot of miles on them? No, they don't, because they're used somewhat infrequently. But when they are needed, it's either that or hire a charter bus to take these kids, and that's extremely expensive. So does a more thorough analysis need to be done of the white fleet? Yes, I agree that we should do more analysis on that. But the bottom line is we still got almost 20-year-old vehicles here that we're telling coaches to take these kids in. And do you really want to continue running those vehicles that are approaching 20 years old? So that's a decision the board has to make, and I agree, you need some more data to in order to make good decisions. But I was asked to try and start updating the white fleet as well, so that's what I was trying to do here.
Well, thank you for that. And that's all I'm saying is well, I can just speak for myself. This board member needs more data. And my frustration, again, is not with you because you've only been with us a short while. I've been asking for this kind of data and analysis for 7 years.
Okay, well, I got my marching orders. I'd be happy to start working on that for you.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments?
Well, I'll just say I
Board Member
appreciate Board Member Kirby's comments because buses have seemed like a big black hole of, we ask the community for money for buses, but we're not really, we don't, as she mentioned, have a holistic idea of why we need them, what exactly is going on, and I get the idea of we need to replace them on a regular schedule, but we also need to understand how our buses are being used, and especially the maintenance and the mileage issues, I think, would help our community understand why we're always going, why we're always asking them for more money for buses. So I think that will be helpful to help clarify the whole bus issue. Thank you.
Can I add one more thing?
Yes, Board Member Kirby.
Mr. Cook alluded to this. We have to look at our assets in conjunction with the drivers because we just invested in trying to, well, we just approved an investment in increasing and retaining our bus drivers. And so if we're successful on that end, then we will have those CDL licensed drivers who can drive the yellow buses, and then that begs the question, are we shifting our resources to more of the yellow buses, and therefore maybe we don't need the white activity buses because we don't have an HR issue anymore with bus drivers. That is, again, that is more of the holistic strategy that I'm looking for that complements the asset replacement strategy.
Right, any additional questions, comments?
Okay, well, we'll get with Mr. Cook, and we can do more research and get more research on the vehicle situation, both campus support and pupil transportation.
Thank you. Thank you.
That's it.
Is that's it?
That's the last one, right?
That's your last
that we were
slide.
going to talk about from our last meeting
Okay.
to bring forward to this one.
Terrific. Thank you very much. All right, so at this time then we'll move on to our next action item, 3B, discussion and possible action, upgrade and expansion of video security system.
Thank you, President Perlberg and members of the governing board. Security continues to be a very important aspect of what we do. We are entrusted with our taxpayers' most valuable commodity, and we take that charge very seriously. Before we get into the actual video system, I would just tell you that in light of recent tragedies, we have formed an alert team of including Aaron Helm, Debbie Spalding, and James Dorrell to make sure that when or if, hopefully, another school shooting takes place in the next school year, that all of our people are notified immediately so that actions that are planned at schools that may throw kids parents and teachers, staff in a panic are taken care of, and we act accordingly in a sensitive manner. That we did that after the last board meeting, and to set that up, and in fact, a technician came into my office and put an app on my phone that gets me immediate contact with 3 of those on the alert team. So that's just one of the things that we have done. The video security system that you'll hear about this morning and asked to vote on was part of a longer range plan. It was included in the capital override information in terms of total security allocation of that capital override budget. Ms. Debbie Spalding is here and James, our security coordinator, is here to share this information with you and answer your questions. Thank you.
Good morning, President Perleberg, members of the board, Dr. Kickard. Thanks for having us here today. Unfortunately, the first thing I need to point out is an error on the agenda item. I put it in red here, is I flip-flopped the cabling and the servers. So it's just that the ITS is only the 48,000 and Dell is the 165,000. I just flip-flopped the 2 vendor pieces of information. I sent that to you, Sandra, digitally already. Sorry about that. So now to the presentation.
Do you need training in Excel spreadsheet?
Apparently I do. But hopefully I'm better at PowerPoint. So we want to talk a little bit about history. Is in the 2016 bond, the voter pamphlet, the request included $3,090,000 for school safety measures, and the only detail it put in there was it said including improvements at existing campuses, camera systems, etc. So that's out of the actual bond pamphlet. This request that we're going to talk about today is one component of that, and that's upgrading and expanding the existing video security system. When we talk about a video security system, we're talking about these components, cameras and camera mounts, servers, cabling to get to all those cameras that we're going to add, licensing for existing cameras, and then licensing for new servers. Over the last couple months, James has worked with our network coordinator, Jason Jordan, on putting up a pilot system. So I want to tell you first a little bit about what we have now. So what we have at all the sites, I'm going to say most of the sites, is a video system that is self-standing and it doesn't communicate with any other video systems and you can't access it remotely. And not all schools even have video systems right now. So what we did is we looked at a lot of different solutions and we found one that we could implement ourselves to save a lot of money. And we found one that we can have a centralized system where we can monitor all the different schools from one place, so James could pull it up on his iPad or his computer along with other people that need access. And we did a pilot where we put in cameras from Mountainside, Desert Mountain, and the warehouse so we could see how it all integrates together. This is just a snapshot of some cameras at Desert Mountain. If you wanted to see more detail and see the system, we can show you that, where you can, yes, no, or we can show you it separately. I actually have the software pulled up on, you want to see it?
Sure.
Okay. We have it pulled up here. Okay, so this is the system, and it's just demo, so it only has some sites on it because it's loaner licensing and it's sitting on a server that is not meant to be a video server. So there's not the space on it. But here you can see this is some cameras at Desert Mountain. Some of the cameras are pan, tilt, zoom. So this particular camera is the hallway at Desert Mountain, and I can scroll around and have poor control. Oh, there's somebody. Sorry, I'm not good at this. But you see someone walking along the hallways. So you have a lot of control. People that sit at the cameras all the time have great control over them. But so that's some cameras at Desert Mountain. Here's some at another one of the high schools. That's Desert Mountain and Saguaro have those, so one of each. And then the Mountainside Middle School is some cameras, and then here's some of our data center at the what we call our Network Operations Center at the NOC. So from one interface we can see lots of different cameras. Of course we don't show every single camera because some of our security systems we don't want to share everything about them. But that's just a quick view of what you can see with these, and that we can put all the cameras from the district on it. Even the old cameras we can add to the system. So back to...
Clarity's impressive.
Yeah, Jason did a great job on that for me. So what we want to do is we want to implement this system district-wide. And we've broken this down into 3 different phases. The first phase would start immediately in the next week or so. And what we would do is we would start with the K-5 sites, the K-8 sites, and the middle schools. And what we would do is we'd build a new video surveillance system at each site. So we'd implement a server at each site which will store the video. And then we'll add 189 new cameras throughout those sites. And then we'll also move 139 existing cameras into the new system. So at the elementaries and middles, we'll have over 300 cameras on one system. And then phase 2, we want to start for the next fiscal year. We'd like to start, so we're going to come back really soon. We'd like to start in July on this so that we can get all the cabling done at least, because cabling is a lot easier to do when school's not in session. And then we'll start adding all the high school sites and the support sites. The support sites are sites like the warehouse, transportation, and other sites like that, Apache. So in those, same thing, we're gonna build the sites, add 69 new cameras. So at the high schools, we already have a lot of cameras, and so there's less new cameras to add at those sites. And then we'll move 269 existing cameras over to that new platform. And then the third phase we're hoping to do in another year or 2, and at that point we'll replace all of the old cameras and move them up to next generation cameras. So those are our 3 phases for the project. The pricing for all 3 phases is the first phase is $323,000, second phase $193,000, and then third phase of replacing all the old cameras is $320,000. So overall, it's a very large project of over $800,000. For the first year, we wanted to use the $256,000 that was specifically called out in some media that was sent out to public. It wasn't in the voter pamphlet, but there were some flyers sent out about the bond. So we wanted to use that $256,000, which was for 256 cameras. So we wanted to use that, and then since there wasn't enough money to do the whole project, to pull another $67,000 out of the IT override. So that's what we wanted to do for this year for funding. And then next year, we wanted to take some out of the regular capital. We worked with Dennis on that, that he does have funds available for us to take some capital from facilities, and then we'd like $100,000 out of the FF&E override, and then the remaining funds we'd take out of the IT override. And then the third year, by then we'll have a lot more detail on the bond budgets and on what we're spending at all the sites and what we're spending on the life cycle projects. And so by the third year, we're hoping that we can use all bond money. But we're too far away from that right now to have that full budget. I know that we're trying to do a lot of studying on the bond and what's allocated where. And so we need more data, I think, to allocate that third. But without that third year, we still will have a full system that's all integrated and working together. It's just replacing older cameras is the third year. So any questions or comments on this?
Board Member Hartman? Thank you, Debbie, for the analysis. Really appreciate it, and James as well. Can you walk me through a little bit? My understanding based on this presentation is that the servers are actually on site. Can you walk me through kind of the logic behind that versus cloud-based, and how does redundancy work? Because if there is a situation, how do we have backup to the situation, particularly from a centralized perspective, a NOC or SOC perspective is where you're really going to want to see how it's happening. So how do we take all that into consideration?
Okay, so with our servers, we would have one per site. The idea here is that we will have server storage space for backup, for storage of the video for 30 days. And so we actually have different size servers at each site. The reason that we want them local is we don't want all that data traffic flowing across the network all day, because it will take up too much of our pipe. We actually had one vendor out, and he's like, oh yeah, we're just going to put it across, we'll just have it all centralized at your data center. And I said, okay, well, how much bandwidth do you want? Oh, we want a third of your bandwidth. I'm like, no, we can't take a third of our bandwidth and use that just for video, because we need it for our students to be able to use during the day and our teachers. So that's why we want it localized for the servers. And what we're doing in order to protect that is we will have each of those servers backed up with our backup solution that we use for all of the servers across the district. So if something did happen to that server, we would have a backup of it, so we would be able to restore it.
So just a follow-up question. So can you help me understand then, so 2 points. One, cloud-based. I mean, I know from just home security systems now, it's a pretty effective, economical way to actually have either your primary or your secondary source.
Okay.
So how did we reach that decision? And then second question is, if it's in a crisis situation and there's a utility issue at a campus, that server's going to be impacted, right? So how do we mitigate that issue, and is cloud-based a mitigator, or is there another strategy around that?
Well, a couple of things is, first off, with cloud-based, you are using your entire network to traverse that data up to the cloud. So we'd be filling up all of our pipes with that data. But the second thing is what we wanted, we worked really hard to find a system that we weren't paying fees for every single year. All of this equipment and licensing we bought is a one-time fee. And so this system's not going to cost us $500,000 every year to keep up. And when you go with the cloud base, you pay a maintenance fee, a monthly fee. And so we were trying to stay away from that. Is the biggest reason why we didn't go with cloud. Is we, when you do that, and that's also an M&O fee as opposed to a capital fee. And so we really always try to minimize our M&O fees with the IT stuff. And do you want to say a little bit more there?
And Madam President, Board Member Hartman, from the perspective of an emergency at a site, assuming the emergency is not a power outage situation, which in and of itself is, the use of the cameras may not be of any assistance anyway, it's a power outage. But if it's the type of emergency that we would probably need access to immediate cameras and be able to provide them to our local law enforcement, this system has the ability to remotely do that. Even with the server on site, we're still able to take a look at the video from out in the field. So it's not something that we have to physically be on site to view. Law enforcement would be able to have access to it upon an emergency. Now, whether it is still accessible during a power outage, so if the crisis that involves law enforcement also has a power outage, is dependent upon our backup systems, which is a larger conversation to have probably at a different time.
To that last point, but we do have redundancy, business interruption strategy to support that?
We are working on addressing that. The UPS uninterruptible power supply system in the district has not been maintained ever. And so I am working on getting that finalized and bringing that back.
Okay, so that would be an important follow-up.
It's a big issue.
Alright.
Like, for instance, if there's a power outage, our intercoms are not on UPS right now. So intercoms don't work. So we're working on that.
Okay, all right, I appreciate that, thank you. Board Member Kravitz?
Oh, yeah, I have a couple questions. So, how long will these systems save video?
30 days.
30 days, okay, sorry, you mentioned that, I apologize, I was
That's okay.
writing. And then, you mentioned here that Desert Canyon and the elementary and middle school will share a server?
Yes.
And that will be sufficient? I
Yes,
know they're not the same thing, but I just think of, whatchamacallit, Desert Mountain High School, and their AC system was on the library, I think in Palomino or something, and that didn't work out well with sharing, so, but you're telling me that sharing this server will
Yes,
be sufficient? I know it's apples to oranges.
we are purchasing a larger server.
Okay.
So typically the elementary schools have a smaller server than the high schools, and so because it's an elementary and a middle, we purchase a high school size server.
Okay.
For the two sites.
And then my third concern is we are rebuilding some of our elementary schools, and we don't want to skimp on security, but what we put in, if we're putting some systems into some schools that, they may not be rebuilt, they may be further down the line, whatever we can put in, we can take out?
Well, that's a great question. So of course the servers we can take out,
Right.
and the cameras we can take out. The cabling is something that would be a fee that we cannot recoup. But that's the smallest price on the sheet.
But that would be built into the
Cost of the
construction
rebuild.
cost. Right.
Okay. Board Member Beckham?
So I want to follow up, but I'll tell you, I really am learning about this. I don't already know about it. So I might even get some of what you said incorrect. But you mentioned this, is it UBS system? Is that what you said?
Uninterrupted
UPS.
power supply.
Okay.
So it's just a big battery.
So it's a big battery, thank you, that helps. So that seems like, is that something that needs to be done first before we purchase all of this? Or is it something that can be done secondarily, but then goes to my next question, but do we have the funds somewhere allocated for it so that we can be assured that we're going to get it if it is vital to this proposal?
Well, the UPSs, I think, are vital to the safety and security of our schools. As we finalize the budgets for next year, I don't have an IT budget for next year yet. As we do, then I'm going to work on prioritizing where we should be spending the money, and UPSs is a big part of that. The phone systems aren't backed up with the UPS, the intercoms, and then, of course, the security systems that already exist, they aren't either. So we need to get all those systems. Our network is, because at least the main MDF is, because we were able to purchase UPSs with E-rate this year. But the catch is you're not allowed to use those servers for those UPSs for anything but the network. And they do come out and audit. So we only put the network equipment on those UPSs that we purchased this year.
So I guess my question's going to be, we do have the funding source to maintain and bring that UPS system to where we need it to be. And we will be able to do that this year. I mean, you don't see any foreseeable, oops, we looked into it and all of a sudden we don't have the funds for it. Because I'm just wondering, is that something that we should be funding before we fund all of this? That's a
We
yes
can
or
have
no, I
that
guess.
come back at the next board meeting. I just got the quotes in for the UPSs, I think, on Thursday afternoon, and so I wasn't able to tie them into this. But we should be able to fund it without a problem.
Okay, I just want to make sure that we have our priorities correct.
And
Not
if I
find
may.
something that isn't going to be functional because we can't do Plan B.
Madam President and Board Member Beckham, if I may, I think that we're certainly not putting the cart before the horse within this project, because this project will be a standalone project that will operate 99.9% of the time. The only time that it would currently not operate is if we did have that power fluctuation or a power failure. So I would recommend that you go ahead and go forward with this as is, and the back end being the power source for uninterruptible power supply can be done at any point.
Okay.
So this will still operate without this the vast majority of the day. And it's no different than our current camera system as is right now. Our current camera system is right now does not have that UPS on it.
But it's definitely in the works, and we will bring it. It's a very valid point, but we do plan on bringing that back as well.
Which is why she went out for bid.
Right, right. No, I understand. I just wanted to make sure that we had funding for it too, unless we need to
Yeah,
use some of
she
this
would not
funding.
have been allowed to go out for bid if there was no funding. We don't.
Board
Well,
board
That's why I'm
member,
asking.
We're not supposed to go out for bid without a funding source.
Board Member Kirby, did you have any questions?
No, thank you.
Okay. I've got one, and it's this slide right here, the override FFE and IT override. Is that out of the M&O override? I mean,
This is out of the capital override from 2016. In 2016, we had the bond override and
so
the
when it
capital
says
override.
override FFE and IT override, those are actually within the capital override?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
So the FF&E override, the estimated budget for that is $800,000 a year. And then the IT override is typically 4.9, but next year it's less. So between those two budgets, we just try to pull someone out of each of those. The FF&E override is for furniture, fixtures, and equipment. So this does fit
Right.
in that criteria.
Right, right. Yeah, I'm just trying to put it in place with, I mean, we have the capital override, so.
It's definitely part of that.
So exactly, so when you have it in this, on this slide, you have capital override, that's separate dollars from the capital override that
this
are
is
not in the
capital,
FFE
capital.
and IT. What's that?
The 80,000 is regular capital. That's out of Dennis Rayler's 750,000
Right.
that he normally gets. So
Right.
that's separate. And then the last two are the capital override. It's just, I just took it out of two different
You took
buckets.
it- exactly.
To be
But-
specific.
But all three are within the district's capital override. That,
Not the.
No, the
or
one
is it
that's-
the MN
80,000 was
Because we have
by
an
the
M&O
DAA.
override, we have the capital override.
Right.
I'm trying
And
to
then we have
understand where
regular
those
old
buckets are.
capital. It was on your slide today, Doug.
Oh, so capital is not out of the override, it's actual capital.
Out of the DAA, it was part of the
DAA.
750,000.
Got it, okay.
for
There's the
building services.
distinction,
Yeah.
all right.
Sorry.
No, that's all right, that was my, okay, got it, that's the bucket, all right, thank you. Any additional questions or comments?
I've got one after that discussion.
Okay,
When-
Kirby?
What's the decision process to determine when we spend out of the capital override versus the DAA?
I don't know that answer. Doug, do you?
Well, the capital override is determined by what we went out on the ballot pamphlet, the categories, and then the dollar amounts that were placed in that. So we don't just spend that because the taxpayers are giving us, but we have to follow the guidelines that we proposed and budgeted. And then the regular override is based on what our availability is and the various demands across the district. And so Dr. Virgil has presented some transportation expenses, building services expenses, and so forth out of that DAA, or capital override. So in capital override, it does compete with other demands in the district. And Cabinet usually makes those decisions as to what we recommend, and so you saw what Dr. Virgil recommended. I don't know if that's really a process, but it is certainly guidelines at least. Dr. Virgil, do you have?
Well, there is a capital override breakdown that when you pass the capital override and in accordance with the specific things that you said in the voter pamphlet that the capital override was for, so those capital override dollars are identified, they're already categorized as to what they're going to be spent on. And then the capital comes from the district additional assistance, and that is separate from the capital override. And there is not a specific plan for the capital dollars, and that's why when I showed you that slide, the bulk of that is unallocated. There was 380 for copiers and 750 for maintenance, and then the remaining portion of that is unallocated at this point.
Right. And the reason I'm asking the question is because we had dollars in the capital override set aside for technology and transportation. And I'm just wondering why we're already leaning on the newly acquired DAA dollars when we haven't spent the capital override dollars yet. And I guess I don't really expect you to, it's a rhetorical question. I'm just curious as to what the plan is and why we would do that.
I can address that.
Well, if I can just clarify, because I'm trying to understand these buckets too, it looks like, especially in this phase one, we are going, I mean, bulk is coming from the bond, but the first step is the IT override, which is the capital override, right. 67,000. We then are looking at, in phase two, over 113,000 out of the capital override, then going to 80,000 for NDAA, correct?
Right.
So I mean, we are tapping in, well, I'm looking at the FFE as well.
Right.
The 113,000, oh,
Yeah.
7.7. Right, if you put those together,
Yeah.
so that, you are kind of attacking the capital override first before going to that DA. Is that, am I reading that right?
Yeah.
You are, and then also we already allocated some money from next year's IT override for the switches and access points that we are getting from E-rate. E-rate's paying 50% and we're paying the other 50%. So there's already money allocated out of next year's budget. And then we also need to do some more computer replacements. And we started this year, and next year we need to continue. So I don't want to give too much of the IT budget up yet, especially since it's not even been officially given for us for next year. So I put the smallest amount possible in there.
Okay, it doesn't, I mean, everything everyone's saying I know to be true. It still doesn't answer the question of how do we make the decisions. And I guess what if you think about how Board Member Beckham always is questioning the bond and the long-term spending, it's the same kind of line of questioning for the capital override. And you know, we just got this DAA money within the past 14 days, and all of a sudden we're just spending it. And it's just, I don't understand it when we have millions sitting in the capital override that we got months ago. And maybe there's a legitimate answer. I just haven't heard it yet. And I'm wondering if it's just we need a long-term plan for the capital override. And in the absence of the long-term capital override plan, are we just spending the short-term DAA dollars?
Okay, well, first off, to address the long-term plan of the capital override for IT, that is my summer project, is to get the next 4 years allocated. I'm still using the newbie card but I can't after July 1. So we'll have the 5-year plan on what we plan to allocate that money towards. But as this project came up, we haven't, Dennison, James and I have been meeting for months and months on this project, probably since October. And we just really see the need for this, and so we wanted to really focus on this project and make sure we get it started this year, along with all the other security projects that, are paired with this. It's just such an important issue in our schools right now.
So are you saying then that in order to get this project going, you needed more money than was originally allocated for this year, and that's why you're asking for $80,000 from the DAA?
Yes. Yes.
So that's because there is no 5-year plan for that capital override expenditures and what you're going to purchase. So in the future, you'll be able to come in and know what you need to buy, how many computers, what kind of networking support, and then other projects like this, and how that comes in capital override, and because you'll be more specific as to what you're buying, you'll have a better idea of the cost going in when you set that up, and may or may not come to ask for more help from the regular capital account.
Correct.
Okay.
Board Member Hartman.
Okay, so
Board
ask
Member
a
Hartman
follow-up
has to leave.
question?
Board Member Kirby. Board Member Hartman has to leave, so I want to make sure she had any other questions.
I appreciate that. I
Sure.
apologize, I do need to go.
Okay.
But I do want to just say that Debbie and James really appreciate your work on this. You have enough for a vote here, but I truly do support the upgrade and expansion of the video security system. I see it as a priority, and I appreciate the work, and I appreciate the summer project as well, but you have my support.
All right.
Right, thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. All right, Board Member Kirby.
Yeah, thank you. So I guess what I'm hearing then is, for example, Debbie's responsible for the capital override budget, and then Mr. Cook would be responsible for the transportation budget in the bond. So they own their areas, and then that rolls up to the overall number that Mr. Virgil manages. Is that how this is? Is that the process by which this is working?
Yes.
Okay, that helps a little bit. So that and then the last question is, does DAA money, if unused, does it carry forward much like the M&O?
Yes, it does. It goes into our capital reserve, and so it's available. It carries forward. We don't lose it.
Okay, great. Thank you.
And just to be fully transparent, and there are other sections besides IT and transportation that have parts of the capital override as well, instructional areas and so forth. So just to be sure that everybody understands out there that we're not just limited to the two examples that Board Member Kirby mentioned, but they are all laid out in the pamphlet.
Board Member Beckham.
So it sounds like, in Board Member Kirby, would this be your interpretation also, is that especially for the capital override funds and the facilities, although we know that you've talked with Dennis Rayler, that he's willing to give you the $80,000 out of his $750,000 budget for FY19.
That's correct.
But we're making the assumption that those funds right now are available in those budgets, because Dr. Virgil is confirming that yes, they are available. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes. They're available.
And allocated properly.
Right, and that'll be subject to when we approve the budget, when we get to that point, that you approve that allocation of those capital dollars. our proposal, our recommendation will be that we have those dollar amounts set aside for facilities. But obviously, we haven't gotten to that part yet.
Right.
Right, but that's assuming that we get to there, then yes, they'll be in there.
Correct. And then to Board Member Kirby's point, the capital override, and I appreciate you pressing the issue so that we now know we will have a long-term plan so that we will be able to see it as we go to approve other things, that it is within the budget, how much we actually spent, and that the funds are available. So thank you. Thank you for bringing that up.
All right.
So I put the agenda item back up with the amended, so that you
Thank
can
you.
see that.
All right. Any additional questions or comments? If not, then we would be ready for a motion. Board Member Beckham?
I move that we approve the upgrade and expansion of video security system as proposed with the amendment that is provided on the PowerPoint this time.
For clarity, I noticed you have Phase 1, but we discussed that Phase 2 would be starting in July. Do you not need board approval because that's capital expense? Do you not need board approval for Phase 2?
We're going to, I was waiting until next year's budget comes
Okay.
to you at the end of June, so we will have an item on that meeting for the
Okay,
Phase 2
got it.
funding.
All right, so we'll move forward then. So we'll have that action item in June.
So I'll just
Just
clarify.
make sure we wouldn't slow you down. Okay.
So
Thank you.
clarifying, this is just for Phase 1, then, which is the 323,154.38, of which 256,000 is coming from the bond and 67,000 approximately from the IT override. Is that correct?
Yes. Can I mention that if you wanted to add Phase 2 in there, that, I mean, we do have the money set aside. He already gave it to Dennis in your budget, but, I mean, it's up to you.
If you're comfortable
back.
with us doing that in June and we're not slowing
That's
you
what
down,
Yeah,
it
that's
would be probably
what
more
we posted.
appropriate to.
We posted
only
Phase 1.
Phase 1 is right,
Yeah.
perfect. So
Thank you
that's,
for the
I just want to
clarification.
make sure that you won't be slowed down and we didn't need to make an accommodation. Okay, so then that motion is on the table. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Board Member Kravitz. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Motion passes 4-0.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. Such an important topic these days. All righty, yes, unfortunately. I'd like to make a motion that we adjourn.
Second.
Thank you, Board Member Beckham. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Motion passes 4-0. Thank you all.